I also had error in Opera that there's not enough memory. Then everything crashed, you know? Can you hear me, bro? Hello. Aussie.
Was?
Bro, can you hear me or?
Can hear you. Can hear you. What's?
I'm
I watched a video in the background. Sorry.
talking to wall, bro.
You're very you away from the microphone.
Yeah, wait. We should always talk English now, even if I'm not streaming, so you learn it, you know? Or so we get
No.
so we get better. Yes, yes, yes,
When
yes, yes, yes.
when you're not streaming, I'm not talking English. Sorry.
But you should.
No, I don't want.
But then you will get better faster.
I know that I learn proof speaking. I don't want it.
But it's useful, very useful. You you know perfect English. Should always looking to improve it.
Been shown to us.
I think the first break in the wall was the 2017 New York Times report, where they were talking about it in logical, sensible language, that these things might be from another world.
I'm
I think
just
that movie that you're discussing
doing my aim routine now, and I go offline.
It's very good. It doesn't even have any like UFO footage. I mean, maybe like a little bit.
It's just
testimony.
All
And
right,
at the end
brother.
of it, you kind of
See
draw
ya.
the conclusion like, oh, this makes sense. Like this, what they're essentially saying is one of the problems is if they have been funding these secret programs, then for all these years they've been misappropriating money.
Oh yeah,
and
they've been lying
lying
to Congress.
and that's super illegal.
Very illegal, but you know, like,
illegal.
is Congress going to do anything about it? Because it's not the first time. Like we have the ability, and this is the most frustrating thing. So this is my second term in Congress now. But as a first term member of Congress, you know, when you get elected to Congress, you would think that they'd bring you in and they'd say, okay, this is how you do the legislation. No, you get elected, you show up to kind of a crash course for about like a week and a half on, you know, how to not get in trouble with ethics, and then you're basically winded down by lobbyists. They don't actually tell you how to do the legislation. Basically, the only rules that you're told are never vote down a rule, which is a procedural motion to bring legislation to the floor, and don't really ever vote against your party. Of which within the first week I broke both rules, and so I was on the naughty list, per usual. But the thing is,
they tell you how to do it. That's kind of crazy.
Well, they tell you basically those are the two rules, and don't go against that. And you'll have any issues.
Those are big ass rules, though.
Yeah, because it's like, you know, you're supposed to represent your constituency. So if you have people calling your office saying, don't you vote for this, then you vote against it. It's like people forget that you're supposed to represent, right, representative instead of just do what the party wants. But you know, there are mechanisms that have existed since Thomas Jefferson, who wrote our damn rule manual, that enable us to actually pass legislation and actually hold agencies and people accountable from a punitive perspective. And I don't know if you were tracking, but like I brought a vote on former Attorney General for basically refusing to testify to Congress and respond to a subpoena, and that was called inherent contempt. And a lot of Congress was like, what the hell is inherent contempt? It hadn't been done since the early 1900s. And I actually read it in the rule manual, and I read the rule manual twice. So like, so crazy what happens when you read books. But we were able to find this out, and it was a mechanism that Congress can use to actually basically send the sergeant at arms to go arrest people.
Jeez. Okay. So one of the things that the documentary was calling for, that I think is the only logical way to solve this, is a mass amnesty for these people that misappropriated money and
or whistleblowers.
Well, the whistleblower thing's crazy. Like, they leave them alone. Like, come on. Of course, everybody should fucking know this stuff, guys. The real crime is you keeping the secret from humanity. That's the real crime. Okay, the other stuff is horseshit. It's just the interpretations of what you're writing down on paper. You're making up rules. But if you ask the general public how they feel this should go, a rational, normal person would say, no fucking way. The defense contractor should be the only people who know that we're not alone. Fuck you.
Especially when we're facing a massive deficit, and you see that they're like the Pentagon hasn't been able to pass the audit, and I don't know how many.
Yeah, all that stuff is great, but just for humanity. Just for humanity. That is a giant piece of information that no one should have. No one should secretly keep information that would change our entire perspective on our existence.
It's definitely wrong that it's happening, for sure. What I will tell you, though, is the issue that we have with bringing forward legislation that would give mass amnesty and pardon to these people is that there are people within the intelligence community and within Congress on both sides that will try to, if you come forward with this, and I'll tell you a very prime example of this in a moment, that they will block it, they don't want it to pass, they will stop it from even coming to the floor, they won't bring legislation that will address it because they want to keep this information secret. So Representative Tim Burchett...
But why do they want to keep the information secret?
Because I think that their mouthpieces in control of the deep state, and that's a thing, and it exists on both sides, okay?
So someone will come to them with marching orders.
100%. Representative Tim Burchett, before I got elected, was kind of on his own little island in regards to the UAP stuff, and he will himself tell you that, you know, this is 100% like a thing, and that these defense contractors and what he believes, you know, the Pentagon not passing all these black budget programs. I mean, like, he will tell you, he's again been leading out stuff way before I got there. He had a piece of legislation that was supposed to enable the FAA to report and develop a different reporting procedure for UAP stuff. And at the time, the chairman of Intel ensured that legislation was not brought forward, that was stopped. The piece of legislation actually passed out of the Senate. It really had no teeth to it. And then Representative Burchett drew a primary challenger that was being backed by the chairman of Intel. And so, you know, when you are touching these, it's like, you know that meme where you have that stork that's like, don't touch this, and then the little foot comes out?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what we're doing, and it's not exactly easy because you will take heat from both sides. But it has been a good group that's been assembled that's bicameral, meaning it's both in the House and the Senate, and bipartisan, meaning both Democrats and Republicans are saying, like, hey, this should actually happen.
Are they publicly talking about not releasing the information, or is all this stuff done in secrecy?
It's done behind the scenes.
Because if they had to do it publicly, if they had to announce their position on it publicly, it would be very damaging, I think, to anybody's political career on the right or the left.
People would be pissed, right?
Well, they're pissed. Well, because I'm pissed. Because if they've had it for this long, if they really did recover something as early as 1947, excuse me.
Well, I can tell you is, for us specifically, we actually were made aware. Some people come forward that said that they wanted to brief. So about 2 years ago, when all this kicked off, we had requested briefings from Arrow that's in charge of kind of compiling the investigative aspect of the AP stuff. And by the way, from the get-go, even talking to Arrow, I was like, this organization is literally a BS organization. They're never going to tell us anything. And every interaction that we had in this get, I was like, this is nothing, whatever. But then these people came forward and said that they were actually denied. They were told to not brief our group specifically on this topic, and that it was from, at the time, members of the House leadership, but they wouldn't say who. And so I actually went with another member of Congress and contacted multiple people, and they all denying us access. So it's done behind the scenes. You'll see these random little troll blockages that might pop up. But what I can tell you is that with the new administration, specifically with FBI, specifically with ODNI, we have gotten transparency to where previously we would have been stonewalled. We were actually given briefings, and so what I will tell you is we are going to push for the information that we sought to get out there for people to see.
So do you think that the whole idea of disclosure is maybe a multiple-step, very agonizing, frustrating, slow process, rather than a big dump of all the information that they've had from Roswell to the Aztec one to apparently there's a whole slew. I don't know if that's everything, but there was another during that same time period. There was a really prominent UFO recovery thing that was not as publicized as the one in Roswell. The big mistake with the Roswell one was the newspaper printed it. And so then they had to backtrack, and then they had to do the press conference where they had like some scattered pieces of a weather balloon that didn't look anything like a UFO.
And then
they said,
sorry.
But meanwhile, they flew the wreckage to right field. They flew the wreckage, and Truman met them there, supposedly.
Well, I can tell you in our hearing, we were actually notified, and you can pull this up. I think it was one of the witnesses had talked about what had happened at Vandenberg Air Base, where there was this thing that appeared over the base. It actually had multiple blotters reporting on it from phone calls into law enforcement from like hundreds of people, and whatever had appeared over the base was basically bigger than a football field and basically a red cube with some weird thing in the center of it. I actually had our witness draw this out. This guy is sober as a priest. I mean, was a great pilot, and he's talking about all this. And so, you talk about this stuff, it seems like a sci-fi movie, but based on the evidence that we've seen, I don't have any reason to believe that these people are lying. Based on the evidence that I've seen from our own government, I think that there's something there that the American people deserve to have access to. And so this is not just on this topic, but again, in other topics as well, this is my perspective, is transparency is what builds trust. Other governments have revealed certain information on it. To think that we are the only, life form on this planet or in this galaxy, I think is a little bit crazy, given, the fact that I also think God exists and that there's other creations. But then again, you get into this aspect of, why is it that you also have this aspect of, certain religion that has been very controlled and I think rolled out in a certain aspect. And, when you have certain books that are removed because they don't think that people should have access to this information or know it, why remove a book from a Bible, right?
Did Wes Huff, did he touch on that? Did he talk about that? Are there people that don't believe the Book of Enoch was really part of the Bible?
I don't remember how he discussed the missing books.
Yeah,
he brought it up. I don't remember how.
That's the guy to talk to.
Yeah. So from
that's
what I
the guy to talk to about. You know what I mean? Because you have to really understand the history of the Bible to be able to figure out what's legitimate, what's not, why they put it into the New Testament. I have some very erroneous ideas about it until I talk to intelligent people that really know the history of it. It's very strange stuff.
Well, so from what I gather, and by the way, I'm not a theologian in any capacity, but just from my personal opinion on this. So you have the Ethiopian Orthodox text, which has, I think, 88 books of the Bible in total. But in the Ethiopian Orthodox text, it's basically kind of like a mainline OG version of the Bible. And then sometime in the 4th century, there was actually a group that came together and they removed certain books. And the story goes that Revelations actually had replaced Enoch. And so it's interesting because when you're looking kind of full circle and you hear the stuff that some of these people are talking about, and then you see and you read the book of Enoch, which is a wild read, okay? And then you look at kind of what our modern day description is of what angels and entities are versus what Enoch was seeing and reporting in his language and ability at that time. I think that there's a lot that brings you to then ask the question, well, why would they remove this information? If it's truly, written in part of the oldest Bible in the world, why would they then take it out and water it down? And I'm not saying that you can't find God through the Bible, right? Like everyone's on their own spiritual journey. I think everyone can pray and have access to God. But I just find that very interesting. And so what I will say is that I like to have the whole kind of picture in front of me, and so I feel like to fully understand A through Z, you kind of have to be able to read it.
This is an ad for BetterHelp. The internet is a breeding ground for misinformation. Even a simple search for ways to get rid of a headache can produce millions and millions of results, from taking pain relievers to detoxes to medication to cold compresses. It's overwhelming. And even when you do find something that's true that works for other people, it might not work for you. In some cases, it's better to just ask a living, breathing expert. If you have a headache that won't go away, go talk to a doctor. And if you're struggling with your mental health, consult a credentialed therapist. You can learn a lot about yourself in therapy, like how to be kind to yourself and how to be the best version of you. Whether you want to learn how to better manage stress, improve your relationships, gain more confidence, or something else, it starts with therapy. Try for yourself with BetterHelp. Millions have benefited from their services, and there's a reason people rate it so highly. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/JRE. That's betterhelp.com/JRE. Yeah, I just don't know about the history of it. Is there any debate about the reality of that book? Is there any debate about whether or not it was either fraudulent or discredited or something? Yeah. Like, why did they... Because I know there was some kind of controversy that Wes Huff described. I just can't remember.
I just looked through a transcript real quick. I didn't see you guys discussing Enoch or discussing Isaiah, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff like that. I didn't see Enoch discussion.
No, it must have been me privately talking to him about something, another video that I watched. The thing about like what Wes Huff does is so interesting. It's like he really understands like the history of the text, the language in which they use, the names in which they chose. And when he breaks it up, one of the things he told us that was craziest was that the book of Isaiah was exactly the same in the Dead Sea Scrolls as it was 1,000 years later. They found one that was 1,000 years older, and it was direct. It was word for word, verbatim. Like, that's bananas. 1,000-year-old story that's exactly the same, written that they didn't know there was a version of it 1,000 years ago. And then they find it in these caves.
It's confirmed in text.
It's nuts. It's really weird.
I mean,
it's really weird stuff.
And the fact that this kid, Shepherd Kid, was able to even find these scrolls that they were set up, and just led to that point right in time where he finds this massive, basically, mission that the Bible's real. You can actually look into, there's a New King James, and you can actually look into the Catholic Bible as well that also has, they call them Apocrypha texts, because the King James Bible Bible doesn't acknowledge them, but there are also other books that are not considered, approved by King James. So look, I was on my mom's side, I was actually raised Catholic, and then had my catechism did all that, and then on my dad's side, I was raised Christian, and then later on Messianic Jew. And so I feel like I kind of have like a good cross section, and I've been exposed to a lot of this growing up. But it's definitely interesting. And so look, I don't tell people like I'm not saying that like aliens created mankind. I don't believe that, because I at the end of the day believe that God is responsible for our creation. But I do think that what we've been programmed to believe in regards to our ability to be able to use our mind, the spiritual aspect of us, really does exist. And I think that once you kind of remove yourself out of this basically rat race and you can like really reconnect with that, I think that that's when you kind of realize, hey, there's a bigger purpose here in life, and like what is our end objective? And if you're given a position of influence or a position of power and you're not doing the right thing for humanity, you're not guiding people, then that's something that you have to answer for. So I want to make sure that I'm good with that.
I hear you. That's a lot. I think these stories, especially when you get to stories like Noah and the Ark, and that these stories exist in basically every religion, they're real similar. They're real similar. I think all of these people are trying to document a truth. It's just what is that truth is where it gets weird. When it gets to like other gods and giants created man.
Well,
and
Enoch talks about that.
Yeah, oh, I know.
Which is crazy.
No, it's wild stuff. If it's legitimate, it's wild stuff. And then, do you know anything about the Ethiopian church that supposedly has the Ark of the Covenant in it?
Yeah, I've looked into that. I actually wanted to, and again,
You're in the government. You can like
yeah,
get
so I
something
actually wanted to do a codel to just, but of course, like we're focusing on other things
done.
right
Send
now.
me seals. Find that fucking
I was like, I
thing.
need to pay for this for myself. So I'm not getting tax dollars, but just go check it out. What's interesting is the CIA allegedly located the Ark of the Covenant. I think the
remote viewed.
They remote viewed it. You can actually find that. You should actually pull it up.
Ethiopia?
No, not Ethiopia, but it was in a Middle Eastern country. They weren't able to locate the actual. I think the New York Post did an article on it where they actually had the handwritten notes on the Ark of the Covenant location, and they remote viewed it. You should actually pull it up. Yeah, I'm serious about it.
Did they go there and see if
I don't know if
correct?
they did. I don't know. This is like Indiana Jones.
What?
But
Decades-old CIA documents on Ark of the Covenant resurfaced in a classified group text spat. What?
wait, like
It was a group text argument that caused this stuff to
no,
be
check out
released?
pull up the New York Post one because they actually have the handwritten notes from the remote viewer that actually documents it.
Okay.
It should be. I think it's like the New York Post.
That's so funny.
Oh, there you go. Have one. This is wild because it actually goes into descriptions of angels too. And so actually, so in Enoch it talks about, well, if you scroll down, now that's that you can probably click on the scribe because it'll show you all the documents from the actual declassified file. This is also on CIA.gov.
What year was this?
This happened recently. This was like a couple months ago that this just kind of came all out.
Right, but what year was this project? Does it say?
1988.
88.
5 December 1988.
Wow.
So scroll down.
So in 88 they found the Ark of the Covenant.
Allegedly they remote viewed it. We don't know if they followed
Who
up.
was president back then? Reagan?
Go down.
Bush?
Senior. Okay, so scroll down and then you'll see that. So this is like, so they're going through in the notes. You have to read it, but you can scroll down.
So this is he's like drawing where it
The
is.
remote viewer, so you have like the different things that are describing it, and if you keep going, you'll see like a cherubim. Keep going.
He's like showing the peak of
Oh,
the
wait,
building.
sorry, go up a little bit. So that's interesting because if you look into actual, so there's like a wheel text. If you look into description of angels and Ezekiel too, I think that's a tide. But go down more. So but yeah, you have like the actual here purpose of container. They should have like a cherubim drawing somewhere down here. Oh, yeah, see, so that would be the seraphim. So it's
What is that,
interesting.
the what?
The seraphim.
How it's open.
Yeah, so basically when they describe the ark, and so he's going through describing these are the hand notes for it, and then actually says that it's in the Middle Eastern country, the remote viewer describes the clothing in which individuals are in the area. I feel like I'm describing like an Indiana Jones movie, but this is actually from the CIA.
This image, you scroll back where that, what is that thing? Is that the corner of the box?
The covenant, yeah, he's describing, if you go up, and these are actually the handwritten notes on what was described by the remote viewer, and you have to go through the entire document, but yeah, that's what's described surrounding the ark.
Do you know what they asked him to find?
Well, yeah, the Ark of the Covenant.
They asked him to go look for the Ark.
Yeah, it's in, if you go higher from the document.
Right, but if you ask me to go look for the Ark of the Covenant, right, I know what I'm looking for, right?
Well,
Like,
apparently these
I put
remote
it in my
viewers.
head, I draw what I think, like, show me that they fucking found it.
I don't know if they did, but they
I don't know if they did either, but it's like, it's interesting, but it's not as interesting, because you're saying show me the Ark of the Covenant, right? So he's drawing what we all saw in Indiana Jones.
Or can you locate it? So the
What year was
descriptions.
that? That was before Indiana Jones?
It's under the same time period.
When did Indiana Jones come out? What a great
The 90s, right?
I don't know. I'm thinking.
And like the first two are the best.
Raiders of the Lost Ark was the first one. That's the one. What year was that?
1981.
Okay, so
Precursor.
that's 7 years earlier. Everybody saw that movie 100 times. You know what it looks like. You know what the ark looks like. So if I tell you go draw me the ark, where's it at?
You think
all you have is some scribbles on paper, unless they actually went there and found it.
Well, what's interesting, and I should probably ask Radcliffe, like, Radcliffe, can you tell me this? I never looked at the Ark of the
What do you
Covenant.
say, Jim?
The mission is to access and describe the target identified by coordinates, and then the coordinates, the tasking, the mission statement. Training target is the Ark of the Covenant.
So they did say, go find us the Ark of the Covenant. And then this dude apparently said, keep AOL to a minimum. What is that?
I saw that on the paper earlier.
Have to be careful with editing, though. This does not seem to be a problem at this time. Just something to watch for. Attain excellent site contact. Okay.
Definitely interesting.
Well, it's weird that they're talking about it like it's a real talent, like someone can actually do it.
Well,
Domes.
Yeah, target is in a container. This container is in another container. Has another container inside of it. The target is fashioned of wood, gold, and silver. The target is similar in shape to AOL. So that's something of location, right? Is that what it means? Yeah, that's it. Coffin is decorated with the seraphim. See sketch. This target is located somewhere in the Middle East as the language spoken by individuals present seem to be Arabic. Well, wouldn't you want someone who could fucking decipher Arabic to do this?
we don't know how far it went, and I definitely have questions. This would not be the first time that a government would have looked for something, especially because people theorize that the Ark of the Covenant had these abilities as a super weapon.
I know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like the remote viewer is limited by his ability to understand the language. Stop. Scroll back up, please. Yeah, right there. So it's somewhere in the middle. Visuals of surrounding buildings indicated that the area, the presence of mosque domes. Individuals in the area were clothed in virtually all white, had black hair and dark eyes. One figure I honed in on wore a mustache. The target is hidden underground, dark and wet, where all aspects of the location of the target. See, the only problem I ever have with these things is that these places are all controlled by terrorists and it's all, dictators and crazy people over there. If they found out that the Ark was there, they would fucking take it.
Well, I think there's this aspect of, if you look at it from a biblical perspective, no one would be able to access it anyways because it would be protected, that's what the Bible says.
Cannot be opened until the time the team's are.
Oh, Jesus. Once the time to open the container, the mechanisms of lock systems will be found to be fairly simple. Individuals opening the container by prying or striking are destroyed by the container's protectors
Well, it's interesting is remember in the Bible always talks about how there had to be
through the use of a power unknown to us.
They melt you.
Bro, yeah.
well, so they had to, go through the special process of being considered, holy basically to access it. So all that to say that there's something out there, right? I think that obviously God's real, and this job has definitely, put me in a position to where we're able to help get other truths out there, if you will. And
You need to get the truth of that thing out there. They need to find out.
Dear
Like,
Director
you know how
Radcliffe,
much
as you
the
look at the
world
Ark of
would
the
change if you found the actual Ark of the Covenant, and you could explain a lot of things. Like if these Ethiopians have it, which Graham Hancock believes.
Allegedly they do.
Yeah, Graham Hancock believes that they do. And he said that these guardians, they all get cataracts and die of like radiation poisoning.
I mean, there's something to be said about the Ethiopian people as a whole, and going back to the Ethiopian Orthodox text. Actually, when I first launched this task force, I actually went and I met with a Ethiopian Orthodox pastor, if you will, just to kind of see and explain and ask questions that I can exactly go to, the Smithsonian and ask. And, his response is interesting, especially from their perspective. You have a lot of this aspect of, I think, religion that tries to be doom and gloom, and then in the Ethiopian perspective, she's like, first of all, your timeline's wrong. And I'm like, what do you mean your timeline's? Like, well, the biblical text in modern day Christianity, it's a little bit off, right? So we use completely separate, he's like 364 days out of the year. He's explaining all that. And he's like, but even then, so, we don't have the perspective of, we are in the end of days, etc. But, the way his perspective just seems very optimistic as opposed to pessimistic and filtering and controlling information. All
He's probably not online.
He's off X.
He's off TikTok.
Yeah, he's not subjecting.
You were posting about that, said that the viewer was identified with the target and didn't know what it was. And
Oh.
being Ark of the Covenant after all that explanation.
Oh, well, that's much different. So that whole thing at the end of it was what they were saying it was when they wrote it in that report.
It's just a bunch of words put together. And
Got it.
Hearing Pal put up talk about
Okay,
it.
well, that's way more interesting. If he didn't know what he was looking for and you found something with the Ark of the Covenant, that's pretty crazy.
They kind of like talk them on, right? They'll like give them something and say like walk us
Yeah,
through.
I'm just doing devil's advocate because I have no skin in the game. I don't know if it's real or not real. I'm open to it. I think there's something going on. I think there's more going on with people than we let on. There's some extra thing that's happening with human beings, the way we're all connected to each other that we don't really totally understand. And I think the idea that you can access information that's not local, I don't think that's that weird. I think that might be an emerging aspect of human consciousness or an aspect of human consciousness that's atrophied.
Or just an aspect of spirituality that we've previously forgotten because we're in such a digital age that kind of programs you into the rat race. And I think people, the more that they're kind of like, there has to be more to life than just like a 9 to 5. And, working for this aspect of materialism, like, don't get me wrong, I like, a nice car and everything else and all that. But, there's also this aspect of, being a human. And like, if you have kids, I think that's like one of the things, like you have a daughter, I have a son. And it's like when you're a parent, it kind of like makes you realize, wow, there's this aspect of like love that I didn't know existed before. And you can kind of really be there and help, grow this next human and influence that person. It just kind of, the human experience is something that, you can make it as special as you want. And this aspect of, us being able to have those little quantum breadcrumbs, what I like to call them. Like, have you ever been like talking about something and like you'll go somewhere, hear something and there's like confirmation of what you've been talking about, or, something happens and you're like, asking a question and all of a sudden it pops up and there's an answer. And I think that those little things just mean you're on the right path and doing what you're supposed to do in this bigger picture.
Yeah, well, it's a good way to live life. If you believe that, that's healthy, smart. It's like a good strategy. I wonder, like, why some people seem to have, like, the idea of it being an emerging aspect of human consciousness, our ability to, like, sense things and know things that are going to happen, or know someone's a liar or a weirdo, like, instantly. I always wonder if, is it that, or is it that we used to have that, like, before language, that's all we had?
I think that before tech really evolved, there was a bigger aspect of spirituality that actually talks about that. So like discernment in the Bible, you can talk about, this aspect of being, people say like, oh, if someone has a really bad energy, picking up on it. There's something to that. But I think that because, and it's really happened, I think, in the last like 40 years where people are kind of forgetting that. But when you actually go back to, like, for example, we're talking just now about the Ark of the Covenant, the Ethiopian Orthodox text and all this, there's more of that aspect of spirituality that I think has been removed from society. I think it's actually taken away our ability to really respect one another and value human life. And I think that, from like a political perspective, influences decision, like get really pro-war people. Those people are usually not that spiritual and they really don't have a value for life in that aspect.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a real thing. That's unfortunate. That there's a... And in fact, those are the type of people that always want to be in power.
They're the worst type.
That's probably the scariest part of it.
I actually had a really groundbreaking conversation. So like the way I'll describe Congress is you ever have like a job where 80% of it, 90% of it's just like really eating shit. And then like the 10% is like really cool.
Yeah.
And it makes up for that like 80, 90% that you're just like,
that's my hosted fear factor.
Okay, so that aspect of, I think really exists in politics if you like actually care. And I had a meeting recently where I was with 2 other members of Congress that were helping me with the JFK investigation. And we actually met for the first time since 1990 with the ambassador to the Russian government. And I bring that up because at the time of the JFK assassination, the KGB had actually come forward with their own independent investigation and they actually gave it at Kennedy's funeral to U.S. officials. We never got those documents, and it's my belief that the CIA actually destroyed that information and evidence because it would have confirmed what the KGB. And mind you, at the time, JFK was actually in talks with the president of Russia at the time, and his perspective is he actually wanted to do a joint mission between the U.S. government and the Russian government to the moon. And there were aspects and divisions within the intelligence community. You obviously saw the Cold War was happening. They wanted war in Cuba. They wanted war with Russia. So for them to be able to say that Kennedy, who was not a communist, but that he was a communist sympathizer and how he talked to these dirty communists, I mean, that in itself would have given them any ammunition to turn a blind eye or at least not fully figure out who assassinated Kennedy. But I bring that up to say that, when you have these people in power, you can see a lot of it in regards to, there's a summit on the 15th actually with President Trump and Vladimir Putin. And I think the aspect of, anytime you have peace and trade, it's way better than war for everyone involved, for the people in Ukraine, for Russia, for the American people. And I think for the surrounding regions, like I recently got back from meeting with government officials in Romania and Moldova, and it didn't matter. And I actually met an actual member of the Moldovan government who's a communist, like an outward communist. And it didn't matter who I talked to, everyone wanted peace. And then when we had met with the European Parliament and the EU, some of them wanted peace, but then the countries that had the shittiest economies, excuse my language, they were the ones that were advocating for war. Well, you have a war-based economy, it always helps your economy. So if you have terrible policy perspectives, obviously you would advocate for something like that. But it just goes to show that the people that are going through it, the people that are living it, that are directly impacted, no one would advocate for war. And so even just having this conversation, a lot of people, even administration ago, maybe 2 administrations ago, probably would not have had that conversation. But to be able to develop that dialogue, the end result of that meeting was the Russian government agreed to release their investigation onto JFK that the previous congressional task force in the 90s had tried to obtain from the Russian government. And they said no, so they agreed to release that, and they'll be posting it publicly for the American people to go through later on this fall.
Have you seen it yet?
I haven't.
No.
So I'll be seeing it at the same time everyone else.
What do you think is in there, if you had to guess?
So when I was talking to the ambassador, he's actually a history buff too, and so he had actually said that the Russian government, when Oswald was actually in Russia, had done a psychological profile because they thought, they were like, is this guy part of American intelligence? Like, what's his story? And they thought he was basically nuts, and apparently he tried to go hunting when he was out there, and they were observing him. He couldn't shoot for shit. so they're like, he didn't meet our psychological profile. Then he shows up to the Russian embassy in Mexico City with a gun, and they're like, what the hell is it, like crazy guy showing up with that? Like, what's going on? And then we find out simultaneously as this is all happening that the CIA, kudos to Director Ratcliffe, had actually released something called the Joe Neady's file, and George Joe Neady's was actually he's basically our version of James Bond but more corrupt. And he was basically observing Oswald. He had lied to Congress. This was all in his file. He was then the CIA liaison to Congress during the investigation. Stonewalled their investigations. Was later awarded something from the CIA. So we had the CIA admitting that they lied to Congress, covered up the assassination, or covered up the investigations. We had admissions from the Warren Commission, people that had been subject to the Warren Commission investigation, saying that the Warren Commission engaged in witness intimidation. They omitted evidence. The single bullet theory never exists. The CIA admits that Lee Harvey Oswald was not a lone gunman. People ask, well, does this mean that you'll ever get the name of who killed him? No, because I don't think the CIA was like, kill JFK on this day and use this gun and have this person sign. But there was evidence of multiple shooters for sure.
Well, there had to be multiple shooters. There's injuries. Like one of them was the front of his neck.
We had testimony to that.
Yeah.
And actually, what's interesting is when we first launched the task force, we had left-leaning news outlets that were trying to write hit pieces saying that I was basically launching a conspiracy theory task force, and they had to print the truth weeks ago. You can actually
What is it about people that don't want to believe that some conspiracies are real? Is it a comfort thing? Is it you think you're going to erode trust in the government? Is it you just have such a rigid worldview, and in your mind that there's always been Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, that's what happened, and because of that, anything that challenges your belief system, you fight against?
Well, specifically to JFK for decades, the intelligence agencies were influencing what the print and press was doing.
100%. Until
Now-
Geraldo Rivera. You know, when Dick Gregory brought that film on the Geraldo Rivera show, and you got to see the Zapruder film, you got to see what looks like a shot that makes his head go back into the left.
Yeah, and the
which would
direction.
indicate he got shot from the front. I think he got shot multiple times by multiple shooters from multiple different directions, and I don't think necessarily Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't in on it.
Well-
Here's the problem. People say, oh, Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't shoot. You don't have to be that good with a rifle to be, you're on a ledge, so you have a secure rest. If your rifle's sighted in, and they said his scope was off, but that doesn't mean shit, because you can just drop your scope and it's off. Like,
Well-
all you have to do is take your rifle off of that ledge, drop it on the ground, and now that scope is off. You never drop your gun like that. And
Well,
if you do,
yeah.
you can knock your scope off.
Well, there's multiple problems though, because the Warren Commission actually never even put into the report, right? So like if you're
But let me
conducting
finish. My point is, that wasn't a far shot. It was like, what was it, 140 yards from the book depository with a scope?
Yeah,
and
he
a
should've been
rifle with a
the
rest? No, you could kill a guy like that, and he could have been the shooter. He could have been one of the shooters. But I think there's too much witness testimony, there's too much evidence, the whole idea of the magic bullet theory was just that they had to account for all the wounds in the bodies with just 3 bullets. And they found a guy who got hit in the underpass, he got hit with a ricochet.
Yep.
Yeah. So now they knew that bullet couldn't have hit Kennedy or Connolly. So how do you attribute all these wounds to 2 different guys from multiple gunshots to a single bullet?
It's a magic bullet.
You have to find this bullet that fucking for sure didn't hit any bones. And there's more fragments in Connolly's wrist than were missing from the bullet. The bullet looks almost pristine. It looks like they shot it through like feathers, or they shot it into water, which is what they do when they do ballistics tests on rifles.
Well, what's interesting is the Warren Commission did omit multiple female witnesses who were actually at the book depository that day that actually stated that they had never witnessed Oswald actually in the location or going down the back of the book depository. So that's
Well,
interesting.
it's possible that he could have snuck past them. There was a lot of chaos. You hear gunshots. The president shot. People don't always think straight when things are going nutty. People have a terrible memory right after traumatic events.
Yeah.
Like, yes and no. Like, he might have been there, or he might not have been there. He might have shot at Kennedy, or he might not have shot at Kennedy. But for sure, he was some sort of government operative. For sure, he was traveling back and forth from Russia. He married a Russian citizen. There was a lot of weird shit.
He was under
with that guy.
surveillance by the CIA,
Yeah.
so there's a lot there. However, I will say this: what the official narrative was, we now know is BS, right?
Yeah. Well, that I thought from the beginning.
Yeah, but a lot of the American people did, but to have their own government say no, that's not true, to gaslight them,
Yeah.
and to push this narrative of if you question it, you're wrong, you're crazy. That in itself, I think, when you're talking about like, why do the American people not trust their government, it's really this fracture that starts around the Kennedy era time frame, and you can see that distrust kind of evolves. But why? Going back to your question, why do people refuse to kind of question conspiracy theory? Maybe there's substance to it. And I think it's because it's more comfortable for people from a psychological perspective to live in this comfort area that their government might not do something like that,
Right.
or might not try to cover up something like that, because that's just an easy way of life. But look,
It's too scary.
it's too scary. But the fact is that look, I've traveled a lot, I've dealt with a lot of world leaders. We are still the greatest country in the world. Make no excuse about that. But it doesn't mean that we can't call out and hold our own government and officials accountable. And so that's kind of what my mission has been this Congress, and I hope that it will continue to be. But I'm not trying to do this for like even the next 10 years. So for someone like me, people are like, oh, initially you're going to ruin your political career talking about this. This is crazy. Why do you want to do that? And then they're seeing all these big wins coming out in regards to transparency. And I will say, had it not been for the secretaries that have been appointed by this administration, this wouldn't have happened, because under President Biden, he actually also tried to declassify things pertaining to JFK, and the National Archives never released it. And so in addition to
That's not a good sign. No, that's a
Yeah.
good sign. Like, if you want trust from the American people, you release information. If you want us to distrust you, you hide everything. And you're hiding
Exactly.
everything on one of the most important events in human history.
they were up until recently, and we're still documents that the JFK community, because mind you, I'm actually working with, his name's Jefferson Morley. He is not a Republican, he's a Bernie Sanders Democrat, but on this issue we're working great together, and he's actually been helping me, and he's like, look, I've been waiting for this for like 30
Yeah,
years.
this is a hugely bipartisan.
Yeah, it's
issue.
super bipartisan,
This is
and
something we can all get together. That and UFOs. It's the one thing
There's a
Democrats
lot.
and Republicans both completely agree on. Like, tell us what's up. Tell us what's up. Who killed him, and are they real? Those are 2 giant questions that we all have.
I think they're real. The other part is still outstanding, but hopefully when the documents are released from the Russian government later on this fall, that might be able to provide a full picture. Granted, I'm going to take it with a grain of salt, because it's still, it was written by the KGB. But at the end of the
Yeah,
day,
for sure.
we have a good mosaic that's been put together with at least the documents that have been released with this administration. And for any outstanding documents, I actually have a team assigned to me from the CIA that is actually helping me chase down these documents. And I've already had some interesting experiences, like not creepy, but for example, after President Trump signed the executive order, and Radcliffe has been super helpful, we actually were made aware of this. Allegedly, there had been a document that was at the CIA that was a report from the Inspector General that had implicated the CIA allegedly in the assassination of JFK. So I'm following up on this lead and trying to find this report. And the archives is like, we don't have any documentation of this. The CIA says they don't have any documentation, and they've been good with us so far. So I go to the archives because they're like, we found this weird bag though, and it's in the skiff, and it's been here for 5 years, and it was left by our former attorney for the archives, and so we don't know what's in it. And I was like, well, go open it. They're like, well, we don't have the key, and it's in a vault. And I said, well, I'm coming over. So I drive over, literally, I put myself in the car. I get in the car, and I go to the National Archives. We go into the skiff. I pull out this bag, and I'm like, does anyone have scissors? And we like cut open this little folder, and there's a CD-ROM in it. And this has again been declassified now, so I can talk about it. But there was the CD-ROM of a ton of wires from the State Department, and some of the wires were pertaining to the Kennedy family, and it was actually a WikiLeaks document. And so I think the reason why it was kept at the archives is because you're not actually supposed to have these documents on government computers. WikiLeaks obviously don't have with that. But yeah, I was like cutting it out of a bag at
That's
the
crazy.
National Archives.
That makes sense that you would have the most top secret documents burned on CD-ROMs. That way, no one could ever get access to it by hacking into your computer.
To this day, I don't know even who left the CD-ROM. I don't know, and there's some other stuff in that I don't need to get into. But
I don't need to get into it.
but the stuff that was on there was interesting, and I think I saw recently Tulsi had actually talked about some of the State Department wires that had been found. That, and I think these are the same ones that had talked about the assassination of RFK. There were wires going to the State Department prior to his assassination, which is interesting. So our next investigations, we've done multiple.
What do you mean by that? Like, how did they specifically discuss it?
Well, I haven't seen the actual wires themselves yet, but what that would imply is that the State Department knew about the assassination before it took place.
Oh, jeez.
So now something she talked about.
Did you get into the MK Ultra stuff at all with Jolly West and?
So I look at that on my free time, but that's not the purview of the task force. But there's stuff that you can, again, CI.gov/reading room, super creepy. I did find a document on the archives website that actually ties the initial phases of the MK Ultra program to Operation Paperclip.
Oh boy.
Interesting. And
That
so
makes sense, right? right?
And it's there. I'm reading this to my husband.
Because for sure, the Nazis were experimenting on drugs with people.
They're doing a lot of bad stuff.
Oh, they were doing a lot of horrible stuff. But for sure, they were experimenting on their soldiers and on the prisoners, and they were experimenting on all kinds of people.
Creepy stuff.
Yeah, and if we took some of that and applied it, the Jack Ruby connection to it is that Jolly West went to visit Jack Ruby after he shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And Jack Ruby was like pretty rational before then. And then after Jolly West leaves, he's like freaking out, seeing things that aren't there. I think he said something about Jews burning. He could see Jews burning alive.
It's like a psychosis state.
Full on, lost it. Most likely got dosed the fuck with acid. Most likely Jolly West just hit him with a fucking
That's a terrible way to go.
shot glass of acid. It doesn't like he went so far off the deep end. Then he died later. I think he died a few years later of cancer. But I think he completely lost his mind after Jolly West visited him. And Jolly West was involved with the Manson family thing. He was involved with Operation Midnight Climax, where they had brothels. The CIA was running brothels, and they would get these Johns to come in with the prostitutes, and the prostitutes would give them acid, and they didn't know it. And so they were sitting there, and there was two-way mirrors, and they were filming them. While these guys were like, well, for blackmail, for observation, they knew these people were never going to say, "Hey, you did that to me." You know, look at the government did it, dosed me up with acid, because they're not going to admit they went to a brothel.
Well,
so you have like the perfect group of people to victimize, just try stuff on.
Well, and they got in trouble for it too. Like the CIA had to do payouts, they were getting sued for it, and then when all this did flush out, I mean, you know, it's always.
Well, the Freedom of Information Act was, and then they found a bunch of documents. They found documents that were I forget Tom O'Neill, who wrote the book Chaos, goes into great detail about this.
Well,
it's all about the Manson family and MK Ultra. It's a fantastic book.
Well, even just this conversation right now, there's such a stigma that exists around it because it's such a spooky topic.
Yes.
And so it's
You
like
don't want to look stupid.
You don't want to look stupid. And so look, anyone watching this can go look at this information. Go to CIA.gov/readroom, and no, it's not going to like be a phishing website. It's Instagram. You can find.
Sure it is.
This guy's like, where are you accessing?
Sure.
But you know, it's always been one of those things, and you know, people ask me, I'm just very transparent about it. And I will say something that started out with a stigma of being, you know, this conspiracy theory investigation wasting taxpayer dollars has been arguably one of the coolest task forces in Congress, I think, and we have a lot of good people there behind it. And
I think the tide is turning on that kind of thinking, that these conspiracy theories are silly to pursue. Like some of them, yeah, some of them are
Some are
silly.
crazy, some are true.
But that doesn't mean that some are true. Also, there's a time-honored tactic of taking, like if I was in intelligence community, and I'm not accusing anybody of doing this, but if I was in intelligence community and I had some truth that was very inconvenient to a narrative, and I wanted to label that truth as being a preposterous conspiracy theory, I'd add a bunch of kooky shit to it.
or have disinformation campaigns.
Or dole it out to the nuttiest people on the internet. Dole it out to the craziest people. You know, this guy's got a drinking problem. He's got a conspiracy theory website.
Or take a little and spin it.
Him.
Yeah.
Get it to him. Tell him you're helping him out. You're gonna get him to spread a bunch of kooky stuff so that when that stuff gets disproven, the other thing's attached to it. So the other thing looks stupid too. And that's what I would do.
Yeah, we've had our fill. Like the one thing I wanted to do when I first got the task force is open up a skiff to any person who held clearance to come brief us on what they knew about UAPs. And I can tell you that we've now had
What's
a
the
skiff.
first conversation like when the door shuts and you're like, oh boy, I'm
Well,
gonna get
the problem is I've reached out to some of the biggest names in UFO lore, okay? And they all got skiff flu. And we call it skiff flu, meaning like the day that the skiff was open, that we reserved, we're like, we're here, like, come on, come brief us. They get sick, or
And
the
they
dog
didn't recover
dies.
and come back?
They didn't recover, and then they just don't talk to us anymore. So
They ghost you?
They ghost us. Yeah, so I'm like, well, if you're not gonna tell me to skip, then you're full of crap.
Or you're scared for your life because you're just a scientist who doesn't. Maybe they got threatened. Maybe someone let them know that maybe someone hung something on their door in the middle of the night.
But if people say they're gonna go tell us in a skiff and then they don't show up, it's a problem, right?
Well, I
so they're
understand, but maybe those people don't feel like the government's gonna protect them.
That is one of the biggest things that we've had people bring up is that your whistleblower, but whistleblower protection only goes so far, and you can't do anything for my physical safety. And some of them do allege that there's these actual physical concerns. We actually had someone that we wanted to bring in to testify because our next hearing on UAP is going to be next month. And the individual that was actually told to us by David Grush is actually a former combat controller, and so my husband, Air Force Special Operator, combat controller. So we knew the guy via some friends. So we knew that the guy wasn't nuts or crazy. And we shot him. He did not want to come in. He wanted nothing to do with it. He was like, I'm not touching this. And so you know that stuff like that happens.
Well, also you put those folks on TV, right?
We don't have to. We can do private, but if we testify,
if it comes time, we have to testify. Yeah. And there's a lot of time in between people finding out that this guy came and told you guys what's up to testify.
Don't freak out our witnesses.
But that's the problem. This is why
No,
what I was talking about is what's being advocated in the documentary that to me makes perfect sense is mass amnesty. Now, here's the bad part. For sure, you're dealing with enormous sums of money, and I'm sure people got really rich off of that, and I'm sure it's super illegal if it's real.
With the back engineering potential.
Yeah. I mean, and also the competitive advantage you would give company A if this company gets access to a down craft that can traverse space and time, that can move through the universe instantaneously, that utilizes an unknown element. Maybe someone let them know that maybe someone hung something on their door in the middle of the night.
But if people say they're going to go tell us in a skiff and then they don't show up, it's a problem, right?
Well,
So
I
they're
understand,
already got
but maybe those people don't feel like the government's going to protect them.
That is one of the biggest things that we've had people bring up is that you're a whistleblower, but whistleblower protection only goes so far, and you can't do anything for my physical safety. And some of them do allege that there's these actual physical concerns. We actually had someone that we wanted to bring in to testify because our next hearing on UAP is going to be next month. And the individual that was actually told to us by David Grush is actually a former combat controller, and so my husband, Air Force Special Operator, combat controller. So we knew the guy via some friends. So we knew that the guy wasn't nuts or crazy, and we shot him. He did not want to come in. He wanted nothing to do with it. Was like, I'm not touching this. And so you know that stuff like that happens.
Well, also you put those folks on TV, right?
We don't have to. We can do private, but if we testify,
if it comes time, we have to testify. And there's a lot of time in between people finding out that this guy came and told you guys what's up to testify.
Don't freak out our witnesses.
But that's the problem. This is why
No,
what I was talking about is what's being advocated in the documentary that to me makes perfect sense is mass amnesty. Now, here's the bad part. For sure, you're dealing with enormous sums of money, and I'm sure people got really rich off of that, and I'm sure it's super illegal if it's real.
With the back engineering potential.
Yeah, I mean, and also the competitive advantage you would give company A if this company gets access to a down craft that can traverse space and time, that can move through the universe instantaneously, that utilizes an unknown element, that has some unknown process of defying gravity. It's utilizing no interior mechanisms of control. Everything is done with the mind of the pilot. If this is the truth, if this is what they're saying, these are the kind of things they find, that getting to a contractor would be a massive advantage over the other contractor that also should be on equal standing with the government, right? They both make jets, they both make whatever it is. So it's like, what do? You divvy up your spaceships in between these folks? Like, are they the only ones who get to know it? And then how do private contractors, how are they the gatekeepers of the most important information in the world if it's true?
Well, so, and that brings us to what happened at Eglin Air Force Base. So in a nutshell, we had been told by, so Representative Gates had come forward and said that two or three pilots had to contact them saying that the Air Force was covering up information regarding UAP activity in Panhandle he wanted us to go to investigate. So we show up at Eglin Air Force Base. We're met by Base Commander. Previous to us even showing up on this congressional delegation to investigate, the Pentagon had tried to cancel the meeting. And you can't, so this is under the last administration, so you can't just cancel a meeting and say you can't come to the base. That doesn't work. So Gates actually was on customs services at the time that oversees the U.S. military. And so Gates got the chairman involved, calls back off the Pentagon, gets this meeting on the books, and says, we told them specifically we want to see information on UAVs, we want to see evidence, and we want to have the pilots of all these aircraft, whatever they are, or these spacecraft. We want to have briefings from them. In a nutshell, we get to Eglin Air Force Base. They keep BSing us about the Chinese spy balloon. That's not what we were there to see. And ultimately, we were in the skiff. We got into a verbal disagreement with the base commander at the time, who was denying us access to the pilots and the information, and said that we didn't have authorization. In the skiff, there was many members of the intelligence community. We then go back upstairs to the conference room and proceed to again basically have it out with this commander. And Representative Burchett said, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You choose, sir. But kind of, but at the time, like, yeah, easy way or the hard way. And if it's the hard way, you're gonna have Representative Gates and DC questioning you. So I suggest you do the easy way. So he actually, in the middle of the meeting, we were kind of letting us speak the fire on it. He kind of got nervous as we were talking to him, and I kid you not, he goes, they're gonna like that I'm not gonna let you. So he kind of thinking out loud, but didn't realize that he was basically saying it. And then in the middle of our meeting, he gets up and leaves the room. Like, I have to go to the restroom or something. And then maybe like 5 minutes later, this tech sergeant comes in and says, oh, the base commander's been authorized to go and leave to Georgia. He won't be coming back. And I'm sitting there looking at Gates and Burchett. I'm like, he just left, like in the middle of a congressional delegation. Like, that's never happened.
So he said out loud, they would be happy that I'm not telling you?
Yeah, like verbally articulated it. Gates was there, my husband was there, Burchett was there.
It's just, like, if that guy's... He's in a powerless situation, right? If he does give you access,
he's gonna get in trouble.
He might be really in trouble.
But here's the problem: he can't. Even if it was someone at the site, like the Secretary of Defense, right? Because at the time, this got pretty high level.
I'm not saying it's not illegal.
Yeah. He still, at the end of the day, you're in the military. How our government functions is the military does not decide what the civilian sector and what representatives can and cannot see. It's not supposed to function like that. So he got up and left. Like, I've never seen this happen. I was in the military. I've never seen, like, in the middle of a congressional delegation. These are big deals. You just get up and go and leave to Georgia and you just don't come back. Like, in the middle of the meeting, it never happened.
What state were you in the time?
We were in Florida.
Oh,
he like get up, like drove to Georgia. Like, what the hell are you doing? You're in the middle of a congressional delegation.
I'll go and fish it.
See ya. And then his second in command comes in, and they managed to get one pilot to come down and brief us. And what I'll tell you is, I will say it, Representative Gates has gone on record. He actually did as soon as he left office that we've seen stuff that I don't believe was created by mankind.
So you can't tell us what you saw, but
I'm not you infer.
Infer. See, this is the problem that I have with all this stuff.
I should be able to tell you without losing my clearance.
Well, not just that. That people that have that information should give that information to the general public.
Correct.
And stop treating us like you're smarter than us and that you can handle it. We can't. That's silly.
Which is why we have to declassify. Which is why.
Hal Puthoff stuff?
No.
It's okay. Hal Puthoff during the Bush administration was assigned. He was one of many scientists, and this is also in the age of disclosure. He was one of many scientists that was assigned to put numerical value to pros and cons of UFO disclosure. So they said to him, "We have a crashed UFO that we have been back engineering, and we want to release information to society to let people know that UFOs are real, and that there is something else out there that's not us. That's much more intelligent than we are." So they have this list of pros and cons: banking, religion, societal structure, everything on one side, and then the pros, like whatever the positive aspects of it would be. And every single scientist said that the cons outweigh the pros. And he said, "I would have loved to have had disclosure, but this was just what they asked me to do. They asked me to compile numbers and to do it in a way that's super objective." And he said, "Look, if I'm doing my job, this is where I think it would completely wreck our government, completely wreck any idea that the people that are in charge of us have any position of authority. When there's something that can go 100 million times faster than we think is physically possible through the universe, appear out of nowhere, stop all of our nuclear programs, shut down bases, do weird shit."
But don't you think that that's where kind of it's been interesting because society has moved away from this aspect of like having a spiritual grounding, even believing, and like most people today, I think when you talk about like praying, even that whole concept is kind of just like, oh, they're just, and I feel like that thing's kind of stupid. If you have like a grounding in that, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that's not like I don't think that society would do that. Granted, I'm not a scientist, I'm not running numbers, but just based on how we've kind of been evolving with access to information and kind of questions, the discussions that have been happening, not just here, but I think internationally, I just think a lot's changing. Now, to say that we were, I've heard some wild theories, like people think that, humanity was seeded by UFOs. And I don't agree with that theory. I'm going to address it.
It's a fun one.
It's an interesting theory.
If you found out it was true, would you tell everybody?
I mean, I'd be transparent about it, but I just don't personally believe it.
But would you believe that you found out that was the information?
I mean,
the government had?
Well, I put it out there because that's what
Right, what would that do for your belief system?
That would suck.
Well, it's not really, but maybe that's what's confusing about the Bible. Maybe what's confusing is that it was an oral tradition for hundreds, if not 1,000 years before it was ever written down, right?
Well, I think that it depends on what book you're talking about, right? So
I mean, the Old Testament, if you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
Into text. Well, some of them were written by prophets, and then, but
right.
Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis and talk.
The nuttiest one is Ezekiel.
I'm telling you, Enoch isn't crazy.
Oh, I read. I just don't. Did you find anything about whether or not Enoch is controversial?
You can look up the 4th century.
It was discluded as, I guess, since the 5th century it wasn't in canon.
And why did it get discluded?
The Jewish scribes or priests didn't believe, the rabbis didn't believe it was regarded as scripture.
But what's interesting is that even if that's the case, though, you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually there's Ethiopian Jews, and that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. So like you actually have a division of like the Ethiopian Jewish class that actually recognize Enoch.
How weird is it that some rabbis 500 years ago made a call?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, you can't though discredit it because
it's kind of weird.
But you can't discredit it because again, like when you have people removing books, I think look, and I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just saying you should take a look at it.
Oh, here it is. The main reason for the Jewish rejection of the book is that it's inconsistent with the teachings of the Torah. From the standpoint of rabbinic Judaism, the book is considered to be heretical. Another reason for the exclusion of the text might be the textual nature of several early sections of the book that make use of material from the Torah. For example, Enoch is a midrash of Deuteronomy 33. The context, particularly detailed descriptions of fallen angels, would also be reason for rejection from the Hebrew canon at this period, as is illustrated by the comments of Trippo the Jew when debating Justin Martyr on this subject. The utterances of God are holy, but your expositions are mere contrivances. as is plain from what has been explained by you, nay, even blasphemous, for you assert that angels sinned and revolted from God.
So it was
It seems like some people made a decision that something shouldn't be in it.
yeah, but that's the thing is it's a disagreement in religion and perspective, but they should have still not removed it. And so it's interesting because then you have the evolution of what the King James Bible is. We all know that story. He wanted to get remarried, they rewrote it. But you even have the Catholic Bible that has it's what happened.
Right.
You have the Catholic Bible that had books that were taken out, and then we have the King James. So I'm not saying that if you read the King James, you're not getting you don't have access to that. That's not anything. But I am saying that
Objective. And he said, if I'm doing my job, this is where I think it would completely wreck our government, completely wreck any idea that the people that are in charge of us have any position of authority when there's something that can go 100 million times faster than we think is physically possible through the universe, appear out of nowhere, stop all of our nuclear programs, shut down bases, do weird shit.
But don't you think that that's where kind of it's been interesting because society has moved away from this aspect of like having a spiritual grounding and even believing in like today. I think when you talk about like praying, even that whole concept is kind of just like, oh, they're just, and I feel like that thing's kind of poo-poo. But if you have like a grounding in that, and going back to what I was saying earlier, I think that that's not like I don't think that society would do that. Granted, I'm not a scientist, I'm not running numbers, but just based on how we've kind of been evolving with access to information and kind of the questions, the discussions that have been happening, not just here, but I think internationally, I just think a lot's changing. Now, to say that we were, and I've heard some wild theories, like people think that humanity was seeded by UFOs. And I don't agree with that theory. I'm gonna address it.
It's a fun one.
It's an interesting
If
theory.
you found out it was true, would you tell everybody?
I mean, I'd be transparent about it, but I just don't personally believe it.
But would you believe it if you found out that was the information that the government had?
Well, I put it out there because that's what
Right,
that's
but what would that do for your belief system?
That would suck.
But it's not really, but maybe that's what's confusing about the Bible. Maybe what's confusing is that it was an oral tradition for hundreds, if not 1,000 years before it was ever written down, right?
Well, I think that it depends on what book you're talking about, right? So
But I mean, the
like
Old Testament, if you go back to the oldest works of the Bible, weren't most of those stories handed down generation after generation and then eventually written down?
into text. Well, some of them are written by prophets, and then, but I mean,
Right.
Enoch is apparently supposed to predate even the time of Genesis and
Well,
talk.
the nuttiest one is Ezekiel.
I'm telling you, Enoch is even crazier than Ezekiel.
Oh, I just don't. Did you find anything about whether or not Enoch is controversial?
You can look up the 4th century.
Is it?
It was discluded as, well, I guess, since the 5th century, it wasn't in
Sorry,
canon.
5th century.
And why did it get excluded?
Because the Jewish tribes or the priests didn't believe, the rabbis didn't believe it was canon.
Huh.
So it's regarded as scripture.
But what's interesting is that even if that's the case, though, you have the Ethiopian Orthodox Church that actually there's Ethiopian Jews, and that's considered the most pure form of the Bible. So like you actually have a division of like the Ethiopian Jewish class that actually recognize Enoch.
How weird is that? Rabbis 500 years ago made a call.
But that's what I'm saying. Like,
1,500 years ago,
you can't
made a call.
discredit it
That's
because
kind of weird.
But you can't discredit it because again, like we have people removing books. I think look, and I'm not telling people what to do. I'm saying you should take a look at it.
Oh, here it is. The main reason for the Jewish rejection of the book is that it's inconsistent with the teachings of the Torah. From the standpoint of rabbinic Judaism, the book is considered to be heretical. Another reason for the exclusion of the text might be the textual nature of several early sections of the book that make use of material from the Torah. For example, Enoch is a midrash of Deuteronomy 33. The context, particularly detailed descriptions of fallen angels, would also be reason for rejection from the Hebrew canon at this period, as is illustrated by the comments of Tripho the Jew when debating Justin Martyr on this subject. The utterances of God are holy, but your expositions are mere contrivances, as is plain from what has been explained by you, nay, even blasphemous, for you assert that angels sinned and revolted from God.
So it was
It seems like some people made a decision that something shouldn't be in there.
yeah, but that's the thing is it's a disagreement in religion and perspective, but they should have still not removed it. And so it's interesting because then you have the evolution of what the King James Bible is. We all know that story. He wanted to get remarried, they rewrote it. But you even have the Catholic Bible that has it's what happened.
Right.
You have the Catholic Bible that had books that were taken out, and then we have the King James. So I'm not saying that if you read the King James, you're not getting you don't have access to that. That's not anything. But I am saying that there's a bigger picture here that we need to discuss. And
Well, there's always a problem when people get involved. And when people get involved in making decisions that this could be real and this could not be. The problem is, like, all these years later, you're dealing with the repercussions of that. Like, imagine a world in which if Enoch was left in the Bible and people were like, wait, what happened? Like, explain the nuttiness of the book of Enoch.
Well, it's okay. So if you read it, it talks about the fall of angels, thus creating really the precursor civilization that led to the first flood. I think that when you even go into potentially the technology that was given to mankind by these angels, it talks about the hidden beliefs and theories in astronomy, etc., metalworkings, all of it. But it really does explain. You're talking about earlier how you have a lot of these religions around the world that kind of say the same thing. This is kind of the OG text that leads to those stories that we're hearing from many religions around the world. To talk about angels mixing with mankind and then seeding a super essentially race of humans that essentially were responsible for basically damning mankind to the flood. I mean, you hear about stuff in Greek and Roman mythology, people who had these super crazy powers, and you talk about it out loud and it sounds crazy, but that's what the book says. And then the fact that it was taken out and then it's poo-pooed, yet you have one of the oldest religions in the world, via the Ethiopians, that actually still have it. You have, the Catholic Church that has books that are missing out of the King James version. I'm just saying that, when you read it, you should read it inside for yourself. Don't listen to what I'm saying, don't listen to what you're saying, but truly give it a chance and see what you have to say. And then, you're going back to this whole concept of if you have this information pertaining to UAPs, whatever they might be the origins. I mean, if you have an understanding of what Enoch was talking about, kind of makes sense.
Well, I go back to my thoughts on all this stuff. It's like, very few people could even read back then. Very few people could write, right? So you're not going to write. You're probably going to try to capture a truth. You're probably not writing necessarily to deceive people and make up a story. So the question is with all this stuff is like, what was the original truth that they were trying to write down, and how much of it is getting distorted by translations from ancient Hebrew to Latin to Greek?
Aramaic.
Yeah, like how much of it?
And
And is it possible to even understand what they're saying without understanding the language? And my friend Rick Strassman, he's a very fascinating guy, but brilliant guy. One of the things he did is he taught himself ancient Hebrew so he could read the Bible in ancient Hebrew. It took him 16 years.
Wow.
But he did it because I want to know it in that language.
And that's smart because there's always an aspect of translation where you lose
Sure.
certain
If
implications.
you're playing the telephone game, you want to be second. You don't want to be 15th,
Exactly.
right? And whoever was writing it down the earliest, that's probably you're closer to their depictions of what that truth is than after King James starts fucking around with it.
Got a new wife, gotta remove
all
her
these new
stuff.
people start getting involved. But boy, when you go to the really old stuff, the really old stuff is very strange.
The Orthodox, I'll tell you, the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible, I actually had a staffer that went to Ethiopia. She was on a church trip, and she actually brought me back a copy, and she's like, you can translate it via Google Translation, so kudos to modern day technology. So I have it in my office, and actually when I did my swearing in, I actually did my swearing in on the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible.
Wow.
It's cool. It's direct translation.
That's kind of crazy. It's I would wonder what the impact to all these religions would be if we had definitive proof that we're not alone. Like if there was an introduction, like some sort of an event where they decided, look, this government is too
done.
with all this information. You're holding back the understanding of these intelligent life forms, that they are not the apex of this planet, nor are they anywhere close to the peak of the intelligence that's available out there in the universe. Just let me show you real quick, and then what does everybody do now? Like,
Well,
what happens to the Mormons? Like,
I
what
think
happens?
that brings
Everybody's gonna fucking blow a gasket.
Well, I think that brings us back to square one. So, by the way, I'm by no means saying that aliens are God. That's not what I'm saying.
No,
But I think that brings us back to the fundamental question on: do you believe that God exists? Because if you do, then you realize that our freedom, the freedom of choice, is not a man-given right, but a God-given right. And I think that goes back to the fundamental principles of like what we believe in true representation. So if you believe that God is real, God is powerful, then it shouldn't be a king or a man that you're looking to, but to God for divine inspiration to make your life decisions. That's ultimately what freedom of choice is.
Well, I think even the Catholic Church has acknowledged the idea that if there is intelligent life somewhere else, it doesn't mean that God didn't create it.
Well, that's true.
Maybe God just didn't tell you about the neighbors.
Well, it does say in Enoch, and then also too, I think in Genesis that the stars cried out. And so if you're looking, well, a star, if it's not, what do they mean by stars crying out? And then Enoch actually alludes to stars in certain capacities being potentially angels. Now, I'm not saying like, and this is kind of interesting because I have this aspect of my task force where we've been investigating, but then I have my personal beliefs and my religious beliefs. And what I'm telling you is that in my position officially, I've seen men pervert information to get what they want. So it's not unlikely that an entire, very secret, very truthful text was omitted in an effort to control population and to insert yourself between individuals' relationship between them directly and God. And I think that
Well, especially if it doesn't agree with your interpretation.
Whatever.
Of God. I mean, and this is the issue with these rabbis, right?
Well, I mean, if you're having people determine any information,
Right.
yes, you should not be able to do that.
Just the same things as the UFO stuff.
The UFO
No
stuff-
one should be the gatekeeper of information.
Exactly, and,
Yeah.
and hence the transparency on the information.
Especially something that's it should be for all of us. This is nuts.
I think we're probably going to be responsible for like the book of Enoch sales probably increasing on Amazon.
Oh, I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna buy it. I need to read it now.
You'll check
Because
it out.
I think, well, I wish I could. I mean, I'm sure there's some interpretations of the Dead Sea Scrolls that I could sludge through. But the thing about it is, like, I'd really love to be able to read it in Aramaic. I really wish I could read it. I just don't have the fucking time to do that.
And
You can
If I did.
go and
Uh-huh.
see if there's like an audible.
Oh,
So
no,
I-
sure there is, but what I'm saying
Yeah.
is I really like the Strassman idea of learning ancient Hebrew to be able to read the source material. That's where it gets really interesting. Because like, what were these people trying to write about? And if these people like Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson are correct, and these folks that believe in the Younger Dryas impact theory, the Bible was written a couple thousand years ago. These people that are talking about the Younger Dryas impact theory are talking about a cataclysmic event that wiped out advanced civilization 11,800 years ago.
Well, Plato talks about it, hearing
Yeah.
it from Egyptian teachers, and then going back to the Atlantean civilization.
Right,
It
but
was
my
far
point is,
advanced.
what was their Bible?
Well,
You know what I
so-
mean? Like, if you can get back to 11,800 years ago and read what they thought went down, because I think that's probably where the oral traditions come from. The oral traditions come from the complete collapse of society, rebuild over time, takes forever, and then a re-understanding of what you know to be true about the origin of man and the birth of the universe and why we're here. And then you got to figure out what Jesus is.
Well, so I actually, when I was in my early 20s, I actually went to Egypt to see the megalithic structures there, and then I went to Turkey to see the Sumerian inscriptions and carvings and what they thought the ancient Sumerian gods were, the Anunnaki, all that. What's interesting is that Enoch actually has reference to the Anunnaki, but a different, I think it's like Anu is the root term that's used for it. So
Have you read the Zechariah Sitchin stuff?
No.
Do you know of it?
I have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, that's the most fun.
Yeah, well, I will say with all of that going back to if you read Enoch and then follow about the fall of mankind and the angels with, this is Christian theology, right? So like angels came down, rebelled against God, interbred with humankind. That would be, I think, a good starting point for what potentially the Anunnaki were.
Yeah, God probably didn't like that they were coming around and taking the ancient hominids and juicing them up, make them chess
Not
champions.
approve. Heaven did not approve.
Yeah, it's probably against the code of the universe. God probably says, look, you can go visit, but don't mess around with it.
Well, there's definitely something to be said. It actually talks about this in Enoch about a divine justice. And so I think, again, going back to what is our job, how does society function? You have aspects in like government. Do you trust your government? Is government going to follow through and bring accountability? That's our job at the same sense in that we have to ensure that if we are to truly have an equal and fair society, you have to have this aspect of justice that has to be carried out. And I can go back to something that I found kind of crazy, but the mandatory minimums for child predators are not that high in this country. And so Congress can actually increase the mandatory minimums, but there's been a lot of lethargy about that. It's like, why would you, not want to increase it? Some people are against the death penalty, and I would say that it's not, my job to play God or to judge people, just to help to arrange the meeting.
Yeah, it's a weird job, right? I mean, you're involved in the disclosure of things that people question forever. I mean, those are the huge questions that exist from the 1960s on. UFOs, JFK, Martin Luther King, RFK. Those are the big ones.
We're
Those are
pushing
the big
for it, and there's a good group of people that are assigned to it. I did say recently, so the MLK documents just came out. We're wrapping up our JFK investigation. So after we finalize the JFK investigation, we're putting out an official congressional report on our findings, and people can read it and cite for themselves. And then we have RFK and then MLK. But I think a lot of the MLK family was actually very concerned that we were going to go into extracurricular. That's not the objective of the task force. It's to specifically expose what the government was doing if they knew about potential threats. And people say, well, why do we care about it? I constantly get, well, we shouldn't care about this. No, you should, because there has to be a check and balance. And when you know if the CIA was operating outside the purview of the federal government, if you know that whistleblowers are being punished, if there needs to be reform to the FOIA Act, all this stuff, then we have to be able to